It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. Kate and Laura Mulleavy are two of the biggest names in fashion. They grew up in Northern California. They graduated from UC Berkeley with completely non-fashion related degrees. Then they moved to Pasadena, where their parents lived, and decided to get very serious about designing. They put everything they had into it, working in their parents' kitchen. And then they kind of blew up. They brought 10 pieces to New York, and they came home on the cover of Womenswear Daily. They got a face-to-face meeting with Anna Wintour, who's been a champion of theirs ever since. In 2005, they founded Rodarte, their clothing brand. In the years since, they have piled up Acclaim while staying fiercely independent. They won the CFDA award for Women's Wear Designers of the Year. That's probably the most prestigious award in all of fashion. They've gone beyond the fashion world, too. They won a Cooper Hewitt National Design Award. They got a National Art Award from Americans for the Arts. They even helped design the incredible costumes for the movie Black Swan. Now they've directed their first ever film. It's called Woodshock. It just hit theaters. Woodshock stars Kirsten Dunst, who plays Teresa. Teresa's mom dies in the beginning of the movie. From there, it explores topics like death and guilt, marijuana and nature. It's strange, incredibly atmospheric, also kind of awe-inspiring. A bit like being stranded in the woods, which is what the title suggests. In this scene from the beginning of Woodshock, Teresa is telling her mom about a childhood memory.
Remember when we used to play in the woods together? I got lost that one summer. When I turned around, you were gone. When they found me, I almost didn't want to come back.
Laura and Kate Mulleavy, welcome to Bullseye. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
How long did the two of you live in Aptos, California?
Until we were just maybe early teens.
Yeah.
Before we turned teenagers.
Did you live, Aptos is on the central coast of California near Santa Cruz, if folks are familiar with Santa Cruz. And, you know, it's a world of like giant trees and stuff.
Right, yeah.
Yes, and next to, Santa Cruz, you have the boardwalk and you have the mystery spot and you have things that kind of blow your mind even as children. You always say that the beginning of the beginning part of The Lost Boys is just a perfect documentation of what our childhood was like, because you were kind of the nerdy kids at the comic store, and then there's all the cool punks and all the people in skateboards mulling around and creating that atmosphere.
And actually the footage in that film, because we're huge fans of it, was documentary footage. They just shot the opening of that film. They just went and shot kids at the boardwalk. And but we did grow up on the edge of an old growth redwood forest. Like, we literally grew up on the edge of it. And our father was a mycologist who, studying mushrooms. So we had a lot of time spent in kind of nature and in, a very magical space of giant trees. I look back on it and it really defined a lot of, I think, our creative process in a way, but it also defined a lot of the way, I think, the sensitivity we have toward observation. But it's so cool to kind of have that experience, because it's also something you realize later in life that not many people as you'd think have been around these trees. I think growing up in California, it's kind of, you almost assume everyone's had an up-close encounter with them, but that's just not really the case.
Yeah, to say that they are awesome is kind of an understatement.
Right.
Like,
yes.
There's the scale and age of them is something that is very difficult to absorb and engage with.
Sure, and I think I think honestly, in working and writing this first film that we made, the starting point for us is exactly what you're saying. We literally had this, conversation between the two of us where we kind of said to each other, there's something about when you stand in front of these trees, the way they make you feel. I mean, you kind of think of your life as much smaller in importance and even meaning than you would think, because the scale, it shows you something about your place in the universe. And I think Laura and I were both very interested. Well, how can we translate that feeling? Because it's a psychic feeling. And a lot of artists, we were saying, like, whether it's Steinbeck, Ansel Adams, people that have captured these trees over time have all said the consistent thing. They're impossible to capture. Their scale is virtually impossible to capture. Certainly cinematically, it's problematic and hard.
It's like a physical impossibility to photograph them because you can't get far enough away. They're so big and tall.
Right.
And you can't get far enough away in the forest to see all of them in the same way that you can't just look up and see the top of them.
You're right. Yeah. You really can't do much in terms of shooting. Like, we had zero camera movement we could have. And to the point where it's like, the producers around you were like, is this worth going to do? And Laura and I were like, oh, hell yeah. So we blindfolded Kirsten and we kind of walked her into this area with these 2 trees. And we took the blindfold off and we just started shooting her. And that's some of the first footage you see in the film, which was why it's interesting, is because it's located in a part of the film that's kind of the crucial turning point in this kind of psychological journey of this character. And we really just captured Kirsten's reaction to these trees. And her reaction was not only, I think, located in the experience of what her character would be going through, but it was also, I think, just her actual reaction to the profound, it's almost hard to describe. There's something so it's a spiritual type of thing. It doesn't involve necessarily a religious overtone, but there's something soulful about it.
When the two of you were like teenagers, let's say, did you have the idea that you would grow up to be a team of fashion designers?
That's a good question.
I didn't even... I thought about, I wanted to be a neuroradiologist in school, so it was probably, who knows, that was my drive to get to med school. And
why did you want to be a neuroradiologist?
I don't know. I picked it in a college fair one day, and I liked science. So it wasn't even based in anything. I didn't even know what it meant. I think I did a report where I was, saying it talks about your brain waves and all this stuff. But I didn't know what that was.
I saved her, actually. We both went to Berkeley, and I was a year ahead of her at school. And at that time, I had already, was majoring in art history. And I would run into her on campus, and she would just be crying. And I finally said to her, Laura, you're never going to be a neuroradiologist.
Keep in mind, I just couldn't do the math. I was fine in organic chemistry and physics and all those things. It was just the math. It kicked me out of my major.
I just said, you're going to switch your major right now. Pick something fun. I was like, call mom and dad. They're not going to care. And then I remember saying, we're going to go see Elliott Smith tonight, and we're moving on. And we went and watched that show, and then,
it was great.
She never looked back.
Yeah, I never thought about it. I was like, I'm an English major now, and I can make up stuff and get A's.
Was it a matter of giving yourself permission to do something impractical?
I think it was just realizing at a young age it's fine to change your mind and that you don't have to be locked into things at all. And it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I was much happier. I could do, morph into something else, and it felt very freeing. It's even the way we approach having a company. We're just like, well, I'm not going to make up some big, long-winded 5-year plan because I want the freedom of where it can go.
What were the ideals that you think were partly driving what you were doing?
The main things that I think drove us was this idea that you have to protect your creativity and you have to make sure that you are not giving too much to other people because that really affects what you do. And I've learned over the time that we're very insular and we don't really share a lot because people, if you woke up this morning and you said, I really love this red shirt, I'm going to wear it. And maybe you would say to your wife, what do you think of this red shirt? And then she would say, no, I don't like that red shirt. Then suddenly you might slightly second guess it, even if you're not aware of it. And that's what people do. They're constantly making people second guess what they have to say. So our main thing was to really, support the idea that we have a singular voice and we should protect it, and to make sure that anything that we bother making, we hope could have some type of integrity and over time would mean something that, we would be proud of it. So we always say if we have this bookshelf of all the things we've done, that we would be proud of those things that sit on there. And that's kind of how we run all of our choices. That's how we run a business. But That I don't know if this is what you should tell everyone when they start fashion, because you don't make any money that way.
Well, I mean, I was reading, I read a piece that came out not that long ago in the Washington Post by the fashion critic there.
Oh, you mean Robin Givhan?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, yeah.
And she, in this piece, I think it's fair to say she expressed some admiration for some of the clothes that you make. But she seemed genuinely upset, like angered, that you didn't particularly seem to have any plans or goals to scale your business.
Right. Well, that's not an interview we partook in.
Yeah.
So it's not like she was asking our opinion about anything. Actually, this was an amazing article because she wrote something that I don't think she meant to be positive. But a lot of people that read it, because I haven't personally read it, said to me later, you know what? It just sounded like you were cool at the end of it. And I was thinking, it's so interesting because the thing that she was attacking or criticizing about what we are, why does she even care? I always wonder this. I think, why would it matter to this person if we're a small business or if we care about what we make and we're not polluting the environment and we're, super conscious of the people that are making things? And it's such an interesting dialogue because we're, in the grand scheme of things, a speck on the blip of the money in fashion. And I always think we're the ones fighting for creativity. We're women running a business. It's like all these things that we have. And it still, I'm disconnected to understanding why it would make her feel that way. It's like, pick on someone that's making a bunch of junk. That's what I always think.
I think what's interesting is kind of what Laura is putting out. Like, from our perspective, we're just protecting our creativity. We have an individual voice, and our job is to make things that make people think or kind of dream, and to be upset about it not being kind of scaled to the more mass, version of that, to me is almost like, well, that's like looking in film and saying, well, how come Cassavetes isn't Spielberg, and saying that Cassavetes can't have the same impact that Spielberg did. Spielberg has tremendous, incredible impact, but Cassavetes has incredible impact too. And it was very different scales in terms of budgets and how those films were made, and maybe even mass audience. So I think in a sense, it's like you can't discount something if it's smaller. At the end of the day, listen, we make clothes for creative expression. That's why we make them. The moment that I don't feel artistic about it is the moment I'm not doing that. So, and if that's not okay for some people, that's okay. But we can't, but it works for other people. But I think part of the reason the people that connect to our clothes the way that they do is because of the artistic spirit behind it.
Are you comfortable with the idea that you're making objects of extraordinary luxury? That they're very, very, very expensive?
Well, I do, because of what goes, one of the things that's interesting is what goes into making them. I think a lot of times people are like, why is it so expensive? And I understand it, because I myself feel that way too sometimes about, designer clothes. But
I feel that way about
often
men collecting cars.
Yeah, and often that money in designer clothing is going primarily to essentially to marketing, in that, if you buy a Coach handbag, I'm going to use, I don't know what examples would put you in a bad position socially. I'm going to say if you buy a Coach handbag, you're paying a really significant price for a very inexpensively made product, where the thing that has convinced you that price is primarily marketing rather than money that's gone into the manufacturer. But there are also examples of things that take, if you're buying a Savile Row suit, someone gets paid to pad the lapel.
Right. Yeah, and I think with what we do, there's oftentimes collections we've done where I actually look at the pieces and think, how did we ever get those in stores? I mean, they're like little artworks. We would, there's collections where it's like the fabric would be hand sandpapered and then burned, and then we were hand dyeing everything. And by the time it's done, and we're actually going to be doing a show at the National Museum for Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., and there's going to probably be it's a kind of going to be all from all the different collections. So we had an opportunity to pull. We had I don't know what the curator like 100 pieces out, and I haven't looked at these in a long time. And some of them, even to me, I was like, oh my God, like you could see they're like little sculptures, and I could see all the work that went into them. And I'm actually even surprised now looking at them, but because they don't look like what you would see hanging in a store floor. And I would even say with our clothes, even more, they're not massively made in terms of like, even though designer pieces can be handcrafted and made in a very special way, like ours are like sometimes one of 3, one of 6 that exist in the world. It's so much work. That's why it kind of borderlined on couture, to be honest. And so for me, it's like being in that space, but it's just the ideas warrant that. I like the ideas are complicated. So to bring them to life, it really takes a lot of time, effort, creativity. And in that sense, that's why they're expensive. But it's, like Laura's saying, probably like why a really expensive car is expensive.
But, and the people that are making it are getting paid well because they're artists.
I think a lot of people approach women's fashion or think of women's fashion as essentially a design problem that's about finding the answer of how do you make the person wearing the clothing beautiful, or maybe sexy.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, that's not our company. Sexy is the last word used.
I know.
But it's true. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, I wonder how you feel about that part of the expectation of clothing, and especially clothing for women. There are sort of different expectations for men, but...
Well, I have a real feeling about it because I'm going to keep this about fashion, but I am going to segue it a little bit into our movie, too. I think as a woman making something, I mean, you really work in a paradigm, and I think certainly Laura and I are very aware of that paradigm, and especially the idea that, people want to define a woman, through
a male gaze.
Yeah. And the idea of what it means to be sexy and how you can police how sexy something can be or how sexy it should be or shouldn't be, really the policing of the body. And I think what was even interesting in our film, because in the film, Kirsten's like walking around in a bra. She's pretty much, we stripped a lot of the layers back because if the idea was that the journey of the film was to look inward to her own experience, we kind of wanted to have her be as vulnerable in terms of for the viewer's experience of her. That being said, one of the biggest comments we get, over and over again after these screenings, like whether it's an elderly woman or a 16-year-old will come up to me and say, I just loved watching this experience of her and being in her mind and not feeling like you were objectifying her body, which is an interesting thing considering like she is stripped back. It's not like we have her in big baggy sweatshirts and it's just as simple as saying that. But I think that for us, when in terms of our fashion, it's about creativity. It's always about what we want to make, and it's never about this idea of this makes a woman feel sexy, this makes a woman feel that. Well, we don't make a woman feel anything, and I don't know what a woman should be. Just so you know, too, it's not like I don't love the idea of like someone looking sexy or feeling that way. I think that's amazing. And if they feel that way in our clothes, that's great, too. I'm just not the person that's trying to put that on someone. I need that to come from the person and their own empowerment. If that makes sense. I don't know. It's a hard thing to...
What could you do in a film that you can't do in fashion?
Ooh, that was a good question.
That's... a lot of things.
Shout out to my girl Tavi Gevinson, gave me that question today.
Oh, she did. Well, she's so smart. Damn it.
I would say you could do. It's a completely different process. So, I think that we really were able to explore an idea in its most creative form to its fullest extent, rather than having an idea and really trying to flesh out an idea in a narrative. For me, it was an internal journey. It was so interesting to, I've been designing for 11 years at the point, well, maybe 10 years when we shot the film. And I remember calling up my friend Autumn and I said, I don't know what's happened to me on the set, but I felt things in my body that I had never felt before in my entire life. And I guess that's because, when you're in one field, you can you define, I know how to design, I know how to do this, I know the things that I will approach with it. But in film, I suddenly was accessing an entirely different part of my brain and utilizing that. And that was really powerful.
After doing a few, we've been this last month, going to San Francisco, wherever we go, and we do these screenings. And we have often an opportunity, afterwards to kind of talk to people if they want to come up and talk to us. And people are coming up to us and talking to us about very personal things that are like, when I lost someone in my life, my whole life shattered. I never felt so isolated. The world changed. We had a really interesting older gentleman who came up to us and said, I just really loved watching this movie because I haven't been this challenged in a movie in a long time. And he was like, really wanted to talk about how he loved being challenged. So in a sense, it's like people are coming up to us and we're having conversations with strangers about very intimate experiences, whether or not it's a personal thing about loss or isolation or depression. One person told us, he said, what really freaked me out watching this movie was some of the things that I feel and the anxiety I have. He's like, it really dislocated me watching this. So I feel like I never have those conversations from a fashion show.
Were you scared that you would embarrass yourselves?
Oh,
well, we embarrass ourselves all the time.
Yeah,
so I don't even know if I was thinking about that. I mean, honestly.
I want you to know that's all I ever think about.
Okay, you know what? I mean, honestly, it's like, well, you can't really be afraid of that if you make things. And it doesn't even matter if you're like making a film, or it really goes outside of that almost, because when you put yourself out in any forum that's like a public zone where people are going to have an opinion, but nowadays it's like that's just a teenage life cycle. I mean, you're on the internet, people tell you crazy shit all the time. So I almost feel like we all have to go through this now, whether or not you're making things and it's in the public eye, or you just have an Instagram site and you're 14 and people say things to you on it. We all kind of experience that reality. I just think, though, I think what I was more worried about, it wasn't that. I think I was more worried about knowing that I felt like I really wanted to do something, going into doing it. But when you haven't done it before, it's kind of like, people say, well, you won't know until you go through the whole process. And I always thought, well, I kind of know I'm going to love this. So for me, it was more like, as we went through the whole process, what really occurred to me was, oh, I'm in love with doing this. Like, I want to make another movie right away. Like, this to me was like opening up a creative landscape that didn't exist for me to communicate. So it's almost like if you couldn't speak and then someone said, I'm going to give you this gift of language. And then you said, I can make all these things with the language. So that's kind of what I found. It almost felt like that experience. But I think in terms of you feeling like the pressure of never done something, and what will happen when you put it out in the world, and is this, all those questions, like I think I've learned over time through the fashion part to let go of that.
But you're not sensitive to those things. You just have to protect who gets to talk to you like that. It's so helpful to say those people are not in your day-to-day life. But if you do have someone in your ear every day telling you should be scared you're doing that, that starts affecting the way you think. But if no one knows you're doing something and you can do it privately and you try to make it as safe for you to really flourish in, I feel like that can be a powerful way of, jumping off that ledge a little bit.
Well, we had one show I remember in particular, which was based on Japanese horror films. It turned out to be, over time, one of our...
No, it's the only show people talk to us about.
It's true.
It's the number
most,
one
I
thing.
guess it might be, I think it might be our number one thing. But I remember at the time, I've never done this before. I always have a lot of nervous energy. And I remember crying backstage before, saying, I don't think anyone's going to like it. That's the one time I really remember that feeling. And it's, you know what? You always feel that way on some level. But then you realize it's not why you're making things. I mean, can you imagine? It's like half the things you loved. One of my favorite stories my dad tells is when 2001 came out in theater, and he said, I was sitting in a theater. And, keeping in mind, no one had ever seen anything like that movie. And he said, I'm sitting in a theater, and I'm with my friends, and our minds are being blown. He's like, but half the theater got up and walked out. Well, you know what? It's like, that's the point. It's like, you make things, you've got to let go of it. It does affect you, and you are worried about, will people like it? Will people understand it? Of course those thoughts are in your mind, but I think honestly, like, you can't let that fear rule you, else you won't ever do anything.
Well, Laura and Kate, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Bullseye. What a joy to get to talk to you.
Thanks for
so
having
fun.
us.
It's fun to be in this room. And
when we take off these headphones and we don't have
Yes.
radio voices, we're going to be bummed.
I know.
So,
We have to go back to reality now. It actually does suck.
I know.
Kate and Laura Mulleavy. You can see their debut film, Woodshock, in theaters in Los Angeles and New York right now. If you want to see their design work, we'll have a link to some of their latest stuff on the Bullseye page at MaximumFun.org.